Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. How's everybody doing? You know what I have to talk about first tonight, don't you? I went and shot my new gun. I should tell you that there will be a fuller explanation of why I chose the Glock 19. As I told you on this show, before last November, probably had not really thought that much about getting a gun, even though I am a Second Amendment supporter. I believe in gun rights. I believe in people having the right to defend themselves and all of that. Just didn't push me over the edge, but something about the Paris terrorist attack, the end of last year, something finally hit me. Maybe I'm just naive to that point. I'm open to that suggestion. So what happened was after that, I said, you know what? I better do something. And so there was a long and winding road to me finally getting my first gun. And I have a video, actually audio with pictures at YouTube that will be up probably by the time you hear this show. And it's about 40 minutes long. It's for people who are thinking about getting a gun and have never fired a gun like I was before I got mine. And so you might find that interesting. Or somebody who has a gun that they're not too thrilled about and are looking to switch. I think I have some useful information, being that I'm a guy who went from not knowing much about the particulars of different manufacturers to becoming pretty well versed in it, given I've watched so much and read so much over the last 3 months. So a much more complete discussion you're going to be able to find at YouTube and YouTube only. At my channel there, the Dentzel Domain, where I put up most of my shows that I do for Red State Talk Radio. But just in a nutshell, to use a horrible cliche, I went and shot my gun with my dad. He had his Ruger LC9, which he hates, and actually he sold it today. After firing my gun, he said, I got to get rid of my gun. Your gun is so much better. And I had a great time. Shot about 80 to 100 bullets out of my gun. Got progressively better from one target to the next. By the third target, which was about the last 25 rounds, had some nice clusters. Shot most of the target mostly at 20 feet. And it was fun. And I thought I used good gun etiquette. I've told you how important that is to me. I have a Glock 19. It was shooting 115 grain, full metal jacket cartridges. And I had two 15-round magazines and two 17-round magazines when I showed up. I had them all loaded up, and then we had some extra bullets while we were there, and then I reloaded one of the 15 rounds. So whatever that adds up to is what I shot. And it was weird the first time you pulled that gun. I had some adrenaline going. My arms were shaking a little bit. I'll admit it. I'm not afraid to admit it. What the heck? But by the third target, finally I think got a good handle on it. And my dad thought that I did as well. And he's much more experienced at shooting guns than I am. But what was interesting was I'm firing my Glock 19, which is like a mid-size gun. He's firing his little Ruger LC9. He moves over to shoot my gun, and he shoots it better than I did. That's true. That's a true story. My dad's 79 years old. Pretty good shape for his age, but he is 79. And he shot it, that Glock 19, my Glock 19, better than I did. Just very steady hand, right on the bullseye, 20 feet. I was very, very impressed by my dad. Very impressed. So it was fun. We were there for about an hour, and my dad actually found somebody there to buy his Ruger LC9. That was how much he thought the Glock was better than his gun that he had. So I finally went. I can't wait to go again. Can't wait to get some more bullets. Can't wait to, I have to go on March 8th to get all the paperwork done for my concealed carry permit, and then it's probably going to take about 3 months before I get that. So it's going to be June before I'm able to carry this gun on me. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to the range, and I'm going to practice, and I'm going to have fun with it. So I went, and the Glock just, as far as I'm concerned, new gun owner, just about the smoothest that I could expect. Everything that I read about it, the videos that I watched on YouTube, all true. All true. Just smooth, easy to handle, feels great in the hand. Not too much recoil. The sights probably could be better, but they're probably good for me. So it was just really cool experience. And like I said, I think that I will continue to get better the more I go. I'm probably going to go like once a month, or a little bit more often than that, because I have 2 months free to shoot at the range where I bought the gun, so I got to take advantage of that. So there you go. Shot my Glock 19 for the first time. Loved it. Let's move on to something else. You can email me, by the way, at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can find me on Twitter, Dentzel domain, all one word, no space in between. I had an opportunity. I was watching an interview with George Shultz, who was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State. He's still alive, by the way. George Shultz, 95 years old. Saw a recent interview with him conducted by Peter Robinson, who is one of my favorite conservatives. I think he's one of my favorite. I don't know how well. Is he well known? I guess he is in some circles. Peter Robinson was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. And he is one of the guys who heads up Ricochet.com, which is a site that I mention once in a while on here. Well, he does interviews with Thomas Sowell and all sorts of well-known political figures. And he did a recent interview with George Shultz. And George Shultz, even for being 95, still has his brains about him. It was very interesting. It's about a 35-minute interview, and I'm going to try to link to it at edwarddentzel.com. But he mentioned a speech, the Westminster speech from 1982 that Ronald Reagan gave in his first visit to England after becoming president. And if you don't know what this speech was, I didn't know, but I always wondered, where does that saying, we're going to put socialism or communism on the ash heap of history? It's in this speech, the Westminster speech. And George Shultz had mentioned that because it was such an important speech, and I didn't know much about it, had not listened to it before, but I had an opportunity when George Shultz mentioned that speech. I said, well, I think I got to check it out. It's fascinating. Goes about 35 minutes. You can find it on YouTube. And you watch it, and you wonder where those days have gone. Not just with, Ronald Reagan not being around anymore, but the courage of a Western leader to speak about freedom and people being able to determine how their lives should go on their own. You just don't hear that stuff anymore. It's more about what we're going to get from other people, whether it's a speech in the United States or elsewhere. It's how we're going to make other people pay for something. How one group is taking advantage of another group. In this speech, what Ronald Reagan was doing was he was making a tour. He was going all throughout Europe. And he was getting those countries together from West, of course at the time, West Germany, and France and England and Italy and a few other countries to understand that we need to fight, we need to contain the Soviet Union and what it's doing. Because Ronald Reagan's attitude toward the Soviet Union was much different than his predecessors, not just Jimmy Carter, but the Republican presidents before him as well, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, even going back, you could almost say, to Dwight Eisenhower. And so he had to get all of those countries on board, and it was this kind of talk that did that. And it was an amazing speech. If you have time to watch it, I would do it. Not just because it's Ronald Reagan, but because of the message that it sent. And he's there, what was it, the House of Lords, House of Commons, and all the British politicians were there. You can see Alexander Haig in the crowd. Nancy Reagan is there too. And you just, I don't know what else I want to say about it. It was just fascinating to watch. You know, we say the ash heap of history. Do you know, for people who are Reagan fans, do you know where that comes from? I'm a Reagan fan. I didn't know exactly where that started, and it was from the speech. And it's later in the speech. It's probably comes up, I'm going to say, in the last 10 minutes of the speech. Even though he's known for Tear Down This Wall, which was a speech that was given at the Berlin Wall in 1986. His Time for Choosing speech from 1964. His speech after the Challenger disaster. His speech when, his last address to the nation as president before he left the office. Those are all well known. And then, of course, a lot of his debate stuff. His jokes and quips and statements from 1980, 1984, and then going way back to, or in 1980 when he talks about, I paid for this microphone. You can find that video on YouTube as well. It's very kind of short. But this Westminster speech, I guess, kind of gets covered up in all of that. And it's a good one. So I would check it out. And remember the way the United States used to lead people. And how we used to do that. But the words and emotions and logic that we used to use. And contrast that to today. It's a big difference. And when people talk about how the stature of the United States has fallen since Barack Obama became president, you can see how much it's fallen from that speech in 1982, going back 34 years. It's such a difference. It's a damn shame. And you know who's responsible for that? We are all responsible for that. All of us, both Democrats and Republicans, even though I know a lot of Democrats hate Ronald Reagan, we're all responsible for that. It's not good, no matter how many Democrats may try to tell you otherwise. And we as conservatives, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, I think, later in the show, how we have fumbled the ball with this. And how we've gone from that in 1982 to where we are in 2016, where the truth is, if we really, really want to get down to it, none of the Republican candidates could give that kind of speech and lead like Ronald Reagan did. My opinion. What I think I know. And I like Ted Cruz. I think that he'd be a very capable president. As much as some of you may not like Marco Rubio because of his immigration stance, I think he's a better choice than most. Mm-hmm. But instead, we know who we have leading us, and you contrast what Donald Trump says with what Ronald Reagan was doing in 1982. Now, it should be noted, in that interview that George Shultz did, he kind of gave the behind-the-scenes stuff of what was going on, meeting with the Soviet leaders, with Gorbachev, with Gromyko. Once again, fascinating stuff. And you forget how manipulative the Soviets, the Russians could be. But But even George Shultz said when he met with Gorbachev for the first time, he automatically knew that Gorbachev was a different type of guy. He was more conversational. The Russians, when they'd meet him otherwise, before Gorbachev with Gromyko and others, it was all business. And it was a lot of what he calls talking past each other. They say something, we say something, they don't hear what we're saying, we don't hear what they're saying. Whereas with Gorbachev, first time that George Shultz met him, George Shultz, it was like talking to a regular person, even though George Shultz knew, hey, this guy's still in charge of the Soviet Union. They still have nuclear weapons, and they're still pointed at us. Just a different kind of leader. But he talks about how Reagan dealt with the Pershing missiles and how he got the Soviets to do what he wanted, and it had nothing to do with force. And that's something that George Shultz points out in this interview that I think is so good. When he said it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good. The difference between strength and force. Because there is a difference. Strength is your enemy, your adversary, knowing that if they get into a confrontation with you, that they are going to pay the price. Whereas force is something that you hope you never have to do. And that was Ronald Reagan's attitude. The truth was, Ronald Reagan, as much as liberals and all those anti-nuclear people were afraid of him in the 1980s, the last thing he wanted was any kind of war. However, he knew that we can win this without firing one bullet, one missile anywhere. And he was right. The fear that I have with Donald Trump these days, and not just Donald Trump, but other leaders, is that they want that fight for their own ego. Or their ego is the exact opposite. They don't using force, and they don't believe in being strong, which you could say is the way Barack Obama thinks. For Ronald Reagan, it was never about the ego. He famously said, "It doesn't as long as we attain our goals, it doesn't matter who gets the credit." That is the ultimate Ronald Reagan statement. And it's an attitude, I think, that we should all have about our own lives. And see, this is one of those instances that I think that this reality TV show culture of the last 20 years has seeped its way into normal people thinking. That now everybody wants to be the star. Now, if you're just doing something on your own, then yes, you're going to have to be the star. For example, me. Nobody else is going to write the books that I write. I have to write them. So if I'm successful, I guess I'm going to be the focal point of that. However, as long as I'm successful, it doesn't matter who helps me get there. I'm appreciative to whoever it is, and I'm more than helpful, more than willing to give that person all the credit in the world, as long as we all reach our goals. It seems too much today that we are so caught up in attaining our goals and then taking all the credit. And Ronald Reagan was not like that. And dare I say it, former generations of Americans weren't like that either. You know, the biggest thing, most important part that you have to realize about what happened back in the 80s and the deconstruction of the Soviet Union and the falling of the Berlin Wall. And you know, what's interesting is we think about 1986 as Ronald Reagan bringing up the Berlin Wall and Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. He mentioned the Berlin Wall in his 1982 speech. And it was very early in that speech. And how it needed to come down. What did he call it? A gash across a beautiful city of Berlin. I think that's what he called it. He was talking about getting rid of that thing in 1982. Didn't start in 86. 82 in the Westminster speech. But the biggest part to remember about that time and beating an adversary and truly beating them is that we didn't gloat. We didn't gloat. Hey, just the way it goes. It was like, well, you know what? That's just the way it goes. Let's be friends now. We're willing to help you out. I know it didn't go maybe the way your Soviet leaders, your socialist, communist leaders wanted. But now that it didn't, we want to be friends. We want Russians to come to the United States. We want Americans to be able to go to Russia. We want to trade with you. We want to be friends. And so we never have to go back to that old way again. And I ask you, does Donald Trump sound like that? Do a lot of people in your regular lives sound like that? No, we've created once again, through reality shows and anonymity on the internet, gloating and making fun of others rules the day. It is what has ruined political discourse and discussion in the United States. And if people want to get so caught up in how polarized we are today, it's because of that. If you believe that, that's where it starts. The zingers, the trolls, the getting over on each other, the calling of names. Had our culture today had to deal with the Soviet Union and somehow we would have taken them down, can you imagine the Twitter messages going back and forth between Americans and Russians? Can you imagine it? Can you even begin to imagine how nasty it would be? It's the same way you want to talk about with Iran or anything else. There's no reason to gloat if we win. We just, to use a Donald Trump word, it's no reason if we get what we want that we have to gloat in beating the Iranians or beating ISIS. All we want is for it to end. And let's just move on to some other topic. However, I think in the current United States climate with our culture, that's not going to be good enough. And when you think like that, the peace is harder to maintain. We can think the whole way back to the Marshall Plan. We bombed the crap out of the Germans, the Italians, all the Japanese. We as Americans did a lot of destruction. I mean, we weren't alone, obviously. We blew up a lot of stuff during World War II. But what did we do after we were done? We helped those countries rebuild because we knew that was in the best interest of peace. We didn't do it for financial reasons, so a bunch of American companies could get rich. We didn't feel guilty about what we did. We did it because we believed in peace. And the sooner that these countries could get back up and running with a different attitude toward the world, the better we're all going to be. And that bitterness that some Germans, some Italians, some Japanese may hold against us might dissipate more quickly. And it worked. Just think we have a different attitude today. We try, you could bring up Afghanistan and what we tried to do in Iraq. And those, I think, we tried to help those people out, but I'm not so sure that we don't think we have. We didn't complete the mission for a lot of political reasons. Whereas I think we completed the mission with World War II. Of course, some people would say we should have gone into Russia too afterwards. George Patton and others believe that. Just didn't beat them down enough. They have to understand, if they get into a war with us, we're going to destroy all of them. And any time before that, though, that they want to scream mercy and say, we've had enough, we've changed our ways, we'll stop. That is the only way that you can come to peace in the world. You can't ignore it. On the other, like Barack Obama wants to do, ignoring the enemies the United States have. And on the other hand, you can't do what Donald Trump believes was go bomb, 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 take, embarrass, embarrass, embarrass. All that does is further stoke anger toward the United States. You beat them into submission, and then you hold your hand out and say, are you ready to be friends with us now? And if not, you beat them some more. You don't call them out. You don't embarrass them or anything like that. That doesn't help anything. Right? The goal is peace. Not by giving up. Not by leaving in peace, as Ronald Reagan said in his Time for Choosing speech. Peace through strength. Hoping, making sure others know that you are strong to the point where they don't want to do anything. And I'm not so sure the United States has been like that for a long time. Even during George W. Bush's time as president, maybe going back to Ronald Reagan's time. Maybe that was the last time that anybody was truly afraid of us. What's interesting, what's so interesting about it is how many Americans died during Ronald Reagan. It's as afraid as everybody was. I know that we had the Marine bombing in Lebanon. That killed a lot of Americans. But overall, how many Americans died in conflicts across the world? Not as many as Barack Obama. Not as many as George W. Bush. Probably more. Was it less or more than Bill Clinton? I wonder. Certainly less than what happened when Bush 41 was president. Just fascinating. Fascinating thing that I just happened to run into that I wanted to pass along to you. That how far we have fallen as a country. Not so much economically. Yeah, economics kind of in the doldrums here. Maybe on the verge of another recession, and it all sucks, and there's a lot of blame to go around. But I'm just saying culturally and morally. There was something else that Ronald Reagan, what a negotiator. You know what he proposed during that speech? I have this in my notes. This was amazing, and actually got a little chuckle from the Brits when he said it. You know what he proposed during that speech? He wanted to deal with Brezhnev was still the leader at the time. He was going to allow Brezhnev to talk to the American people on our TVs in the United States at that time if Brezhnev would allow Ronald Reagan to speak to the Russian people on their TV. What a fascinating. And then he even said something about our newspapers being allowed to be circulated in Russia, their newspapers being allowed to be circulated in the United States, just to have kind of a compare and contrast. Now, of course, Ronald Reagan knew the Russians would never go for that. Never allow Reagan to speak to the Russian people or any newspapers. But in that way, he was making a point. And it's funny, when I heard that, you know what, that kind of reminds me of college campuses today. You allow a little conservative on your campuses, and we'll allow a little liberalism, your speakers, to come speak to conservative groups. You know liberals would never allow that. And in that, you find out who truly believes in free speech. But it was fascinating that he brought that up during the speech. I never even knew he did that until I heard it yesterday. But you've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I'll be back after this station identification and some commercials.
Real radio for real Americans. Red State Talk Radio.
This is Brigitte Gabrielle from actforamerica.org. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not go to bed every night absolutely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place, then you're simply not working hard enough. Arm yourself with knowledge so that you too can act for America by listening to Red State Talk Radio. Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. RedStateTalkRadio.com. Lock it in and rip off the knob.
I can't defend my family because I live in Chicago.
I am free to defend my family with my AR-15 or handgun because I live in Wyoming.
I can't even protect myself if I'm attacked because I live in D.C.
I carry my 9mm in my purse anywhere I go in Texas.
I can't protect my small retail shop here in Brooklyn.
We keep guns behind the counter at our shop in Oklahoma. Only had to show it once.
Do you see a pattern?
Demand equal gun rights in America. Go to SAF.org now.
My name is Courtney Luster. I'm 21, well-educated, and unemployed American. I happen to be black, so I'm in the highest unemployment segment of the population, black youth unemployment. Notice I don't refer to myself as African American because I'm an American first. I'm a proud American who happens to have black skin. So please explain to me where African American fits into that equation. You're right, it doesn't. For over 60 years, the Democrat Party has used my fellow black Americans to maintain power in the federal and state governments. Why do I say that? Because I read history. While many of my friends are watching mindless videos, I choose to listen to Red State Talk Radio. Why? Because I want to educate myself, not entertain myself. Red State Talk Radio, America's premier conservative talk radio network. Hey, all you black American youth, be a Frederick Douglass Republican, not an Al Sharpton race pimp. Educate yourself. Listen to RedStateTalkRadio.com.
This is Michael Cutler, retired senior special agent with the former INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. You should know that I'm also a lifelong Democrat, but ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. That's why, despite being a lifelong Democrat, I listen to Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. Lock it in and rip off the knob.
We're back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I want to mention just a couple more things about this George Shultz interview, and then we'll move on. I'll move on to something else. Probably one of the more distressing points that George Shultz made in this interview with Peter Robinson was his admiration for Paul Ryan. Yeah, I know. I didn't like it either. He didn't have many kind words to say about Ted Cruz. You should know. The point that George Shultz made is that it seems like Ted Cruz is a smart guy and all that, but he doesn't know how to govern. He doesn't know how to lead, which is an interesting point. You can take it for what it's worth. A guy who likes Paul Ryan and then makes fun of Ted Cruz, not exactly in step with common conservative thinking these days. You could say. Really, though, it seemed like George Shultz wanted to stay out of the political, who's he supporting or anything like that. Pretty much he wanted to stay out of all of it. But those were a couple little nuggets that he offered. Now, you can choose to dislike him or like him because of that. No, unfortunately, if this interview gets a lot more attention, it's going to further the idea amongst many moderates, I guess you'd say, that Ronald Reagan couldn't get elected in today's Republican Party. He would be too liberal. These Republicans in 2016, they're just crazy, wacko people. And even George Shultz thinks so. Look, he's making fun of Ted Cruz, and he likes Paul Ryan. Well, all those on the right dislike Paul Ryan and love Ted Cruz. That's how out of step those right-wingers are these days. Even Reagan's right-hand man thinks right-wingers today are crazy. I can see somebody hearing that interview or seeing that interview and thinking that. As soon as he said, I was like, oh, here we go. Take it for what it's worth. Whereas, as I've told you, I think the biggest strength that Ronald Reagan had was inside. There is no doubt that he was a hardcore righty. But he knew he couldn't govern necessarily that way. He could not give time for choosing speeches all the time and expect to get what he wanted. Even though I think that the time for choosing speech is easily one of the greatest speeches of the 20th century. I'm not going to necessarily put it up with the Emancipation Proclamation or anything like that, but in the 20th century, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And I'm not so sure that Ronald Reagan changed from those days. I think he was the same guy, straight up through to him becoming president in 1980. But he knew that, hey, maybe, my image needs to soften a little bit. I'm not going to change my values, but my image needs to soften to get what I want done. And he found his ways. He was just a terrific negotiator. George Shultz talked about that a little bit, coming from Hollywood, being the SAG president, of course, being governor of California for 2 terms. He had a lot of administrative experience, negotiation experience, and then under all of it, had this hardcore idea of what the United States was supposed to be and how important it was to be, how it was supposed to be the leader in the world. It had to be, what do you call it, shining city on the hill. Never wavered from that. Never. Despite him not always maybe making the better decisions. Nobody's perfect. But fascinating. But he was still, I think, that time for choosing guy underneath all of that. And the way, he outwitted the Soviet Union, something that no president before him had been able to do, is testimony to that. And what I find out, and what I think the many Republicans who support Donald Trump and maybe others are forgetting, is that it's just not all about winning. To win, you have to have a particular set of hardcore values that you don't waver from. If you don't have that, you can't win. You may be able to win in sports, but not when you're dealing with other countries that you can't force to do what you want, unless you're willing to go to war with them. He won through principle, never wavering from it. Might have been Mr. Nice Guy, cracked a few jokes, shake hands here, kiss babies there, but underneath, just have principles, and they're going to take me they're going to take the United States where it should go. See, I don't believe that Donald Trump, as much as he talks about winning, the United States doesn't win anymore. We're not going to win with him as president. We're not. He's going to personally win. His ego is going to get stroked. I don't believe the United States is going to win with him as president because I don't believe he has any values except making himself look good. So it's interesting. I urge you to check it out. I will link to it at edwarddentzel.com. You can you'll also be able to find it on my Twitter feed. Let's move on to something else. Had this poll come out, seems like an outlier, with Ted Cruz leading nationally. Him with 28%, Donald Trump with 26%, and Rubio in third place. And I think Rubio was in third place. But it certainly was different than all of these other polls that have come out and that have been coming out for weeks, if not months now, showing Donald Trump leading nationally. Unfortunately, I'm inclined to believe that this NBC Wall Street Journal poll showing Cruz leading, I think it's an outlier. I think it is. I don't know how it happened. I mean, that's a big difference from what all these other polls are finding. Huge difference. If it was Donald Trump still in front by 5 points, I might be inclined to believe it. But not with Ted Cruz winning, seemingly, flipping everything on its head. Who knows? What's clear to me, though, is that, my fear is this. One of these other guys besides Donald Trump can still win this. And when I say these other guys, I mean either Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. I've told you, Jeb Bush going nowhere with me personally. John Kasich, not voting for him. Ben Carson, not voting for him. I'm just not going to entertain those guys. So my two guys are going to be Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. And there's still time to try to save this. The problem you have right now is I'm not so much like, does Jeb Bush really believe he can still get the nomination? See, I think if he were being honest with himself, he'd look at what's all these polls and know, you know what, I can't win. Maybe I stick at it through South Carolina. But no matter how much money I still have, and I have all these powerful people in these political positions, and I have this framework, it's just not going to happen. And same way with Ben Carson, same way with John Kasich, even though I know they still have supporters. It's not going to happen. And I wonder what's going through their head every time they go to bed at night or they get up in the morning. If I know it, they know it. If they don't know it, then they have too many yes men around them or yes women. Because there will be a point where, see, here's the problem. The longer this race goes on between these six guys, the more damaging their attacks on each other are going to be. And keep in mind, I don't necessarily have any problem with that because that's what competition is about. All right? But I also realize that the more you try to, with Jeb Bush making fun of Marco Rubio and Marco Rubio making fun of Ted Cruz and John Kasich, of course, making fun of all of them, at some point you get past that point where people can be forgiven. And supporters can make put all this rancor, R-A-N-C-O-R, behind them. And all this arguing does at some point is create a lot of bitterness toward each other to the point where supporters maybe just decide the hell with them. Okay, I'm a Jeb Bush supporter. He's dropping out, but being that Marco Rubio got so nasty with Jeb, I'm not going to support Jeb. I'm not going to support Marco. I'm not going to support Ted Cruz. I'm just sitting this one out. See, this is the problem that could continue. Because you do notice that, even I see it, even though I don't even have TV, that the ads are getting a little bit more pointed. And the attacks are getting a little bit more personal. And each of these debates, it seems like the confrontations are increasing. Because of Donald Trump and not because of Donald Trump. And so that's what I'm thinking about in the long haul. Is there going to be so much damage done to each other? Not so much politically for votes, but getting those supporters of those guys who drop out to go to one of the other, quote-unquote, good candidates. You see what I mean? You see what I mean? Obviously, you can't see Jeb Bush supporters going to Donald Trump. But have we gotten to the point where Jeb Bush supporters might go nowhere? Maybe. Maybe. Marco Rubio drops out. How about all these fights between him and Ted Cruz and the lie word and liar? And what about his supporters? Are they going to go to Ted Cruz? Are they? See, at this point, I'm almost inclined to believe that they might go to Donald Trump instead, given everything that has happened. And if these guys can't see that at some point the rest of them, the other 5 guys, have to get together no matter what differences they may have politically, and know that if Donald Trump gets the nomination, all of their political futures and their membership in the Republican Party is going to be in peril. It's going to do damage to all of them, even though none of them will be on any national ballot anywhere. That's what I know for sure. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I've told you that. It's the exact reason I told you that in a Trump versus Hillary election, it'd be much better for Republicans and conservatives if Hillary won. Because if Trump wins, it sets a precedent. It sets a precedent. And not to mention what he'll do as president, which I think will be a disaster. Hillary will be a disaster, but at least we'll be able to distance ourselves from it. So just get thinking about that, and the longer this goes, but nobody wants to drop out. Everybody, every one of those guys, those other 5 guys, is going to give their reasons why they should stick around. It's a complex situation. It's a great for you sociologists out there. I guess this is a great study for you to analyze all of this, to see how it probably would be good if some of those guys took one for the team, but for long-term gain, but won't because it would be a short-term setback. Right? I mean, they're all decent. Hey, they could all run for president again. They're all of an age where they could come back 4 years from now and run again if they wanted. Even maybe 8 years in Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio's case. Maybe John Kasich. I don't know how old John Kasich is. Maybe he's older than he looks. They could come back. It's not do or die. You could say that about some of the other guys who already dropped out. Bobby Jindal, Scott Walker. They got time. But they won't have time if Donald Trump becomes president and wreaks havoc like I know he will. And wreaks havoc in a bad way, where nobody benefits. I'm just calling it like I see it. But no, I just don't see any of them dropping out for the betterment of making sure that Donald Trump doesn't get this nomination. And so I guess, once again, we're going to get the leaders we deserve. We're going to. Let's move on to something else. Real quick, I meant to talk about this yesterday, didn't get around to it. Regarding the presidential election, should Donald Trump get the nomination? And should he somehow win, even though in every heads up against Hillary and Bernie, he loses? Go figure that one. There's going to be a lot, I think, when this is all over, for the big conservative media type people, talk show people and otherwise, the well-known people, the people who are driving Rolls Royces and flying private jets in this business. That's not me, if you don't know. I drive a 2001 Ford Taurus with 130,000 miles on it, by the way. There's going to be a lot for them to explain when this is all over. Rush went on a rant, didn't listen to it, heard about it, read the transcript, found out about it from hotair.com. Some of the most angry words that I've seen him speak. And what is going on here? Why do I think that, even though I know he made fun of Trump and how he sounded like a Democrat, but then Rush came out and said that he may be doing that to try to get some of those moderates, some of those Democrats. That's what I think he's doing when he comes out and talks about the Iraq war, when Trump talks about Bush lied. Well, I have a question for Rush. Does Trump need to go that far to do that? Is it not enough for Donald Trump just to say, I'm not going to touch any entitlements, Social Security, because he's said these things. He said these things already. In fact, if you ask me, he's already getting a lot of Democrat and moderate support anyway. Shouldn't he be going the opposite direction? Shouldn't he be going more to the right to convince more Cruz supporters and Rubio supporters? But he didn't. Most of what comes out of his mouth is what moderates and Democrats would like anyway. So that he goes so far into Kookville, what demographic is he trying to get? The Code Pink demographic. See, I think what I've seen Rush say, once again, from transcripts, the last few days, he's wrong. I think that I think what's going on here is I think that the well-known talk radio people with the millions of listeners, they've let this get out of hand. They thought that they had this guy under control by saying this and by saying that, and they found out they didn't. But they're never going to admit that. Russia's never going to admit that. Because in the end, Russia and others are all about being seen as never being wrong. And what you can decipher from all of these comments from Rush in the past few days, once again, I haven't listened to him, just from these excerpts that I've heard or I've read, that in the end, as much as he has been telling all of us for years that this is about principles and sticking to conservatism, whether win or lose, what he's now saying this week is, you know what? It's really just about beating the Democrats no matter what Republican win or runs. No matter what kind of Republican runs. That's what you can decipher from everything that he has said this week. And I think he has to do that. I'm not saying he's thought this forever, but he's come to this position because he's allowed this to get out of hand. And now he wants to be seen as not being wrong. So now he has to say, well, Trump's doing it for this reason. Trump's doing it for that reason. And in the end, he's going to win, and that's going to be fine. Whereas Russia's been telling us something different the whole time. He's been telling us to avoid people like Trump and to only embrace conservatism. Well, it's, maybe too late now. But I got to go. I've run this way long. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. Go find my show at edwarddentzel.com. Podbean, Podomatic, YouTube, SoundCloud. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn. Go to edwarddentzel.com /book. to download the first chapter of my next novel, The Comebacks. It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. This is the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.